All right, welcome everyone to Maximus Live episode 74 here on July 21st, 2022. Shout out to everyone who's joining us on Instagram Live. Got a Twitter Spaces growing, YouTube Live, and got a solid show for you set up today. It's going to be less Q&A. We have less people who signed up from last week, but we can definitely take more spontaneous questions that come up from the community. So if you want to join us on Instagram, you can actually raise your hand there. I'm happy to live stream you, or you can just type in your question in the comments below. Same thing with YouTube Live. So every week we start out with a weekly unpopular opinion, and this week's unpopular opinion is, in my opinion, the biggest health behavioral issue facing Americans today, maybe even worldwide, is revenge bedtime procrastination. Now, I don't know if people have heard of this term. It's actually a Japanese term that I think someone tweeted about maybe last year, and it was incredible how viral it went. And it's referring to the concept that a lot of people experience in terms of, you work hard at your job during the day, maybe you're busy with your family, your kids, and you just don't get a lot of time to yourself to do the things that you want to do, and you sort of get revenge by staying up late and consuming media, social media, etc., which makes you end up staying up late, miss out on sleep, and you obviously feel shitty the next day. And I think it's actually the number one driver of sleep deprivation today. Now, obviously, always in the past, there's been television, obviously, for the last many decades, and so people could always stay up late watching television. But I think there's something particularly addictive and pernicious about the algorithm that we see in social media, especially the swiping algorithms on um, Instagram stories, TikTok, Tinder, any of the sort of slot machine reinforcement dynamic apps just keep people hooked. And it's so effective that, in fact, TikTok has this warning that once you've been on for more than an hour, there's literally a video that pops up that says, hey, you've been on this for a long time. Maybe you want to get off of it. And people will still swipe and ignore that just to keep going in this really almost compulsive sort of manner. And so, as a psychologist, I find this concept of revenge bedtime procrastination fascinating because it illustrates some really interesting depth psychology principles, which is, I was talking about this actually online in terms of a lot of people have a familiarity with the idea of sort of not getting cooperation with all the parts of you, right? Everyone says, hey, I got to work out today. And oftentimes you won't follow up and do it. You won't end up going to the gym. And so it's almost as if there's a part of you or maybe parts of you that are not cooperating, right? Because I'll be like, I'd like to do that. I know I should do that. It's in my best interest of well-being to do that, but I'm feeling tired, stressed, unmotivated to do it, so I'm not going to cooperate. But revenge bedtime procrastination actually takes that a step further and saying, not only am I not going to cooperate with the best interests of myself, but I'm actually going to go above and beyond, and I'm going to get revenge, right? And do something that's not only, I'm not going to cooperate in doing something that's healthy in terms of going to the gym. I'm going to do something that's actually unhealthy in terms of keeping you up and making you sleep deprived, right? You know what's interesting, actually, one of the most powerful forms of torture is literally sleep deprivation. There's, from Guantanamo and other really sad and unfortunate examples, keeping people up for long periods of time induces sort of acute or temporary psychosis and literally drives people crazy. So it's a very strange concept that we'd almost do that to ourselves. And as a result of that, it really begs a very fascinating psychological and maybe even philosophical question, which is if you are not only not cooperating with yourself, but you're actively undermining or getting revenge on yourself, who is it that's getting revenge on you, right? Because we tend to think of ourselves as sort of a unified being, right? Like I am me, I is singular, right? It's versus if you think about this whole concept of like lack of cooperation and revenge, it actually starts to imply that maybe there isn't one self. In fact, maybe there are multiple selves. And maybe these multiple selves are at odds with one another and they have conflicting interests. And obviously, if you've studied any sort of analytical psychology, even going back to Freud between the id, ego, and superego, the basic, foundational concept of analytical psychology is that there are different parts of us, right? The id being sort of the primal self that's interested in, basic primal desires, eating, sleeping, reproduction. There's sort of the ego parts of us, and then the superego that is the sort of the social conscious mediator in terms of following the rules of society, what we've learned from our parents, etc., in terms of what we should do. And I think this is really almost kind of brings it to a head as well in terms of the concept of revenge bedtime procrastination. I think revenge bedtime procrastination is not just a social media problem. I think the social media is the tool that exacerbates it, but like I said, you can do it with television. There's other ways of sort of staying up and punishing yourself. But the question is, what is the psychological need that's being met there that is causing people to do it in the first place? So I think it's a two-factor model. The first factor is there is some psychological itch that needs to be scratched that's causing someone to do that in the first place. Because if you're a happy person, you're at peace, your stress is well managed, you've done what you've needed to do for the day, you're going to go to bed and you're going to enjoy your peace and rest and get up and do it all over the next day. But if there's something that's bothering you, you feel like, I don't know, I've been living for other people, my boss, my family, everyone else, and I just don't have the, peace for myself, then you're going to carve out that space and say, even if it takes a couple hours for me to get some enjoyment out of my life, so some pleasure or satisfaction in a tiny little way, sometimes I think we will sacrifice our sleep in order to do that. The other thing I think that's really common is it's obviously serves as maybe an emotional soothing need, right? Where we kind of bottle up our emotions. We may not be very emotionally aware of the underlying emotions. We just maybe don't feel right. And I think if you lack sort of emotional insight or emotional intelligence, what ends up happening is you're like, I don't know what I feel. I just feel bad, which is, by the way, a great example. Like when you go to therapy, especially men don't have a good sort of oftentimes emotional intelligence and the ability to label their emotions. Bad is not an emotion. We're like, okay, it's negative on this valence or spectrum of things. It's negative, but what kind of bad is it? Sad? Is it anxious? Is it stressed? Is it disappointed? Is it guilty? Being able to label the emotion in order to understand what's happening underneath the surface. And once you've labeled the emotion, what is driving that, right? Why, at the end of the day, do you feel, let's say, guilty? And bring that to light and deal with that in obviously a healthier way, which is, obviously, if you have the opportunity to go to therapy or in the moment, there's even ways of doing it, which is, hey, maybe take some time to journal or write about that, right? You're like, I'm feeling guilty, or I'm feeling unsatisfied, or I'm feeling unbalanced in my life. Take some time to think about what the emotion is, what are the thoughts or the beliefs that's driving the emotions, and process that. And what you end up doing, though, is you're addressing the root cause. You're like, I will write about this, I'll think about it. Maybe if there's a solution, I can come up with that, but maybe there isn't a solution. Maybe it's just getting it off your chest, being able to process it, make peace with that, and say, like, hey, there's some stuff I need to do long term, but right now I just feel bad. I feel guilty, and I just want to kind of clarify that in my mind. And a lot of people, just from the act of doing so, in terms of processing their emotions, clarifying them, making sense of them, will find peace and then be able to go to sleep. But when you don't label it, you don't understand it, all you know is something doesn't quite feel right. And I want to get rid of that feeling. And so you pull out your phone, you go through your social media, and then you start engaging in the compulsive ritual. And, if you listen to sort of the neo-Jungians, they actually talk about addiction, and I've talked about this in previous shows, as sort of the unconscious compulsion that happens when you don't take care of those underlying needs. Like if you don't take care of your trauma or your negative emotions, the body will do it for you. And it's saying, okay, well, you're not going to do it in a conscious, mature, healthy coping way, such as journaling, for instance, then fine. I will take care of it with addiction. I'll hit the bottle, I'll hit the phone, I will soothe us, right? So it's almost this other part of us, from our shadows, so to speak, to use a Jungian term, that will compulsively engage in addiction to take care of it for us. So I think this really highlights really some fascinating concepts that one, maybe there isn't an individual or unified self. In fact, I would argue there are sort of multiple selves or at least multiple parts of us that are at odds or at conflict with one another. And so as a result of that, we have to pay attention to the different parts of ourselves and acknowledge and validate those parts of us. If there's underlying needs that are not being met, then we need to address that. So if we have perhaps a very overactive super ego that only follows rules and has no time for fun or play or enjoyment in life, and you're ignoring that, and thus you're going on social media because that's your tiny bit of fun for the day, well, you gotta acknowledge that part of yourself and carve out room, perhaps during the day or on the weekends, in order to have a little bit of enjoyment in your life, but hopefully better enjoyment than just TikTok. That's obviously more deeply satisfying or even quite frankly fun than just scrolling through mindlessly. That's like mild fun. It's not real fun. You know what I mean? But you can't ignore that part of you, right? It's imagine if like you had a child and you said, do your homework, go to school, come home, do your homework all day, and then go to sleep, have no fun, no enjoyment, no play in your life. That kid is going to end up depressed, right? And it's not a realistic expectation to tell your child, okay, just work, no play. But weirdly, as adults, we do that to ourselves, and it's rational. You have a lot of responsibilities. You're like, maybe play is not the top of your hierarchy of priorities, but it has to be. I always say adults are just basically grown children. We need play just as much as children do, and I think when we deny that part of ourselves, it starts acting up. Just as a child engages in a temper tantrum, I think the unconscious part of us engages in scrolling and starts rebelling and starts engaging in that revenge bedtime procrastination. So I think that's really important thus to explore what is the root cause, what are the underlying emotional needs that are not being met by the various parts of us that we need to address in order to eliminate the sort of revenge bedtime procrastination. So that's sort of the deeper root cause analysis and treatment for that issue. And then the second part of it is obviously behavioral, which is, yes, the addictiveness and the engaging nature of these social media tools makes it much harder than it was in the past. Back in the day, you lived in a log house, maybe you had a fire, maybe you didn't have a TV. You're just going to get bored when it gets late at night and you're going to go to sleep. What did people do back in the day for entertainment? Have sex, maybe, read, write. That's all the options that you basically had. Hang around the campfire, tell some stories, play the guitar. There wasn't a lot to do. And after that, you can only do that for so long and you get tired and you go to bed. I actually remember when I would go, camping and mountain climbing a lot, nobody would stay up that late other than maybe hanging out in the fire and talking. But other than that, we just go to bed. There wasn't as much temptation. So you have to remove temptation from, your purview, especially if you know that your emotional equilibrium is not good. So I would say the more negative feeling that you have and the more vulnerability that you have to those negative feelings, meaning that if you're not able to engage in good behavioral control whenever you feel bad, if you're one of those people that, for instance, when you feel bad, you don't go to the gym, when you feel bad, you engage in too much social media use, then you need to practice stimulus control and have it out of your life. I'll tell you actually a really good stimulus control technique that actually a colleague of ours here at Maximus uses, which is he has dedicated devices for the consumption of social media. So on his primary phone and his primary work computer, he has no social media, the websites are blocked, the apps are not downloaded, he cannot use social media. On a separate dedicated computer in a different area or room, or a separate phone altogether, if it's a mobile app, those are on separate devices. And so he can use them, but he can't use it obviously while he's working because it's not on the same computer as his work computer. And if you're going to use it on your phone, it's not going to be your primary phone that's next to your bedstand that you're using for your alarm clock, for instance, because it's too easy to reach over, use your phone for social media use, and engage in that addictive cycle. I actually very highly recommend to folks that they don't put the phone right next to their bedstand because it becomes too easy to reach for it and engage in that sort of compulsive behavioral pattern if it's something that you struggle with. So this is the thing about stimulus control. Everyone doesn't need to do it if they don't have a problem, right? There's some people who can watch TV in bed and fall asleep and they don't have any insomnia. If that's you, then great. But if you're struggling with revenge bedtime procrastination, then stimulus control, have your phone not next to you, ideally even not in the same room. Get a old school alarm clock. I had a client of mine literally bought an old school alarm clock because he's like, I just can't have my phone around me. I'm just much more likely to use it. And that's the only reason I really need it right next to me, is just to wake me up. So I bought an old school alarm clock, solved the issue. Phone is somewhere else. He puts it in his office, in his charging station, which is where it really belongs. It's a tool. So put it in the office where you use tools, and don't mess up your sleep. So I think if this resonates with you in terms of if you've been experiencing revenge bedtime procrastination, it's certainly something I've done in my life. I think it's a super, super common thing these days. Address it on a both emotional and behavioral level, in terms of addressing the underlying emotional needs and the parts of us that are driving those needs, and on a behavioral level as well. It looks like we got a request to join us on the live video, so I'm going to see if I can loop you in. Send that one more time. It randomly disappeared. I think is YG Lee 74. Let me see if I can go live there. If that worked, feel free to join. If not, send another request and I'll have you join the Instagram live.
With a question to you
there we
two.
go. Looks like we got someone.
What's up? How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I want to say that I was on a protocol once before, so if I want to get back started with it, will I have to do another blood work, like get some more blood work done?
When were you on the protocol?
It was like a few weeks ago when I came off of it.
Okay. Yeah, I think if it's that recent, I don't think the doctor will ask you to do the blood work. I believe our policy is if you've had blood work done in the last 6 months, if I recall correctly, you should be good to go. So yeah, certainly if it's been within the last few weeks, I don't think you'll need to repeat that.
Yes, sir. The reason I kind of stepped down from it, because something had happened with my bank account, so they had my account locked for a week or so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they gave me a new bank card and stuff. So how do I update my payment information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would email support@maximistribe.com, and they can help you out. I believe if you just log into the app, which is app.maximistribe.com, you probably can just do it manually yourself and update your payment information. But if you're struggling with that, because I haven't done that myself, email support and they can help you out. So I would say try it yourself. Try to just log into the app, and update your payment information. And if you still can't do it, support can see if they can help you out.
Yes, sir. You mind if I ask you another question?
Oh yeah, no problem.
So what made you want to start a program up like this? Because it's so many programs out here that claiming to help people, but really they're taking money.
So the question is, why did I want to start this kind of company?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a huge problem with testosterone these days. It's been declining 1% every single year. So basically in the last 50 years, it's gone down by a half. And you have probably, all of us have half the testosterone that our grandfathers did. So one, I thought it was a huge problem that wasn't being addressed. And two, I didn't think the solutions that were out there were very good, or things that even I would want to take, right? You have over-the-counter supplements and they don't really work. There's so much snake oil out there. And then there's testosterone replacement therapy, which does work, but it shuts down your testicles and it makes you infertile. And I still want to have kids. And so I was like, that doesn't sound like a good solution, nor do I want to inject myself with anything. And so I was like, both of those sound like bad options. I either have to pick between something that's ineffective or unsafe. But I think there is a third option, which is obviously the oral medications that we provide that are relatively safe and definitely effective. And I was like, this is a clearly better approach, especially for healthy young guys who want to, maintain their own function and not become dependent on it and maintain their fertility. And I found that it was very hard actually to get this solution, even though there's good science and publications on it. And so I was like, I'm going to start a company to make sure that people can get, safe and effective treatment, basically.
Yes, sir. So what about this bioidentical thing that I keep hearing? Like, is it like really like all natural the way that they saying?
Yeah, so this is a great question. This whole idea of bioidentical. So the premise or the principle behind that, they're saying your body produces testosterone, right? And so you want to replace it with something that's bioidentical. It's the same substance. When you buy, even though it's synthetic testosterone, it's produced in a laboratory, the chemical is the same as the chemical that your body creates. And so they are correct in that it is bioidentical, and it seems quote unquote natural to replace the same chemical that is produced inside your body with a similar chemical from outside your body. The problem with it, though, is it doesn't function in the same way when you inject it. As I mentioned, when you inject testosterone, even though it's bioidentical, what happens is the body's intelligent, it realizes it's getting enough, and your testicles literally shut down, they shrink, and you become infertile. And so someone who's on TRT might have high levels of testosterone, but all their other hormones are not the same. Their LH is completely shut down, which is the luteinizing hormone. That's the precursor to testosterone. Their FSH is completely shut down, which is the precursor to your sperm production. That's why it makes you infertile. And your GnRH, your gonadotropin releasing hormone, is also shut down, which is the precursor to both of those hormones. And so a lot of the neurosteroids, basically the chemicals that make sure your brain and your cognitive function is really functioning the way that it should be, they all get shut down on bioidentical testosterone. And so to me, even though it's bioidentical, it's not natural to inject yourself with testosterone because it shuts down all these other hormones that come before testosterone. So to me, it's kind of a stupid phrase, to be honest, because it doesn't produce testosterone in the same way that your body produces. Now compare that to what we're doing. The drugs that we're using are not bioidentical, right? Your body doesn't produce enclomiphene or these selective estrogen receptor modulators. However, the way that they function is it gets a part of your brain to produce more of its own GnRH, LH, FSH, all the precursors that are missing on TRT, and it stimulates your testes, literally makes your balls bigger, to produce more of its own natural testosterone. So while it's not bioidentical, I would argue it's actually a much more natural approach because it's getting your body to produce more of its own testosterone the way that it's supposed to. So I don't like the term bioidentical because I think it's misleading. I think the real question is the testosterone coming from your balls or is it coming from outside of your body? And I think it's better to come, literally the word testosterone comes from your testes, right? Your testicles, which is where it's supposed to come from. So to me, shutting down your testes, like, whether or not you want to have kids, who wants shrunken testicles, right? So I think it's a much more natural approach to produce your own natural testosterone. So I think it's a little bit of an academic debate, and I think it just misleads people with the whole bioidentical stuff. I get where people are coming from, but I think, natural stimulation is more important than the bioidenticalness.
Yes, sir. Well, before I let you go, man, I just want to say keep up the good work, the program. When I've been on the protocol for like a few months, and I feel better pumps I get better pumps in the jail. I'm sleeping way better than I ever slept.
Awesome.
I just want to say thank you for helping this young man out who really need the help and support.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that you found benefit the few months that you were on the protocol in terms of the pumps at the gym. I'm glad you're sleeping better. That's huge. We were just talking obviously about that. Speaking of which, we did launch a second product, the Lover Protocol, that actually is specifically for like gym pumps. It uses tadalafil, which increases blood flow basically everywhere to your muscles, your brain, obviously your penis as well, which is why it's great for sexual performance. But bodybuilders in fact use tadalafil to enhance their muscle pumps or gym pumps at the gym. So that, I think if that's what you really are, the thing that benefits you the most, that lover protocol is actually the best, I would say, for that. But testosterone obviously has its own benefits.
Yeah, I took a look at that, and I mean, while I'm on here, I might as well going to ask. So like, is it like, if I like join the lower protocol, like, do I have to like, is it like 2 separate payments, or will it be a payment all in one?
Yeah, it's 2 separate payments. They're like 2 different products essentially. The Lever protocol has no lab testing because it doesn't increase your testosterone like the King protocol stuff. We obviously do the lab
Yeah.
testing because we have to prove that it works, and that obviously makes you feel confident and reassured that what we're doing is working because it's a whole separate lab. It's not even our lab, right? It's a third-party lab, so you can trust,
Yeah.
that it's making a difference. But Lever protocol, there's no lab test. You know that it works because obviously people notice if they have better erections or a gym pump. It's obvious, right? And so that's a separate product. It's cheaper. It's a 149.99 a month for daily 30-day supply for that.
Yeah, so. Well, all right, man. I'm gonna let you go. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the positive feedback. Like I said, just log in the app, update your payment information, and if you have any trouble, support can help you out. But I'm really happy that it's helping out in terms of your sleep and your gym pumps. Check out our other products as well, and happy to have you as part of the Maximus tribe.
Yes, sir. I still have a few capsules left as well, so I'm gonna hurry up and update my payment information if I can like get another bottle in the mail before I completely run out and my levels drop back down. I don't want that to happen. I love the way I'm feeling.
Good.
I never felt this before.
Yeah, it's always it's kind of funny. Like I think guys get so used to having whatever level of testosterone they end up at, and when you kind of get to where I think your genetic potential should be, like I said, like what your grandfather or your father had, you're like, oh man, like this is what I've been missing out on, and I feel better, or at least I feel like if you had high testosterone when you were super young, or your hormones are raging when you're a teenager, you're like, wow, this is what optimal feels like, and it's always nice to be able to feel that again.
Yes, sir. Once again, thank you so much, man. I'll see you on your next live.
Thank you, really appreciate it.
And also, I subscribe to you on YouTube as well, man.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate it. And we put all these episodes up on YouTube,
Yeah,
so that people.
That's what I told myself when I got on live. Like, I'm gonna hear my voice on YouTube.
Yeah, there you go. You're famous. I love it. All right, man. Really appreciate the kind words.
All right.
Alrighty. That was cool. I think it's the first time we've actually done that on Instagram. Looks like there's some questions on YouTube.
Quick question via JD. So, enclomiphene, why does it have to be prescribed by a doctor? And is it something that I can get just anywhere? Backstory is I've had my hormones tested several times in the last 3 years. They fall within normal range. However, I do feel terrible. My estradiol is within normal range as well. Is enclomiphene still an option?
Yeah, so there's 2 questions there. The first question the gentleman is asking is enclomiphene prescription only? Can you get it over the counter? And the answer is no, you can't get it over the counter. It is a prescription medication and drug. And the reason for that is it's a pharmaceutical. So pharmaceutical drugs have different standards. A lot of stuff that are over-the-counter supplements are things that essentially have existed on the market for long periods of time, or they're naturally occurring in that they're like an herbal extract. And so it's a different process. The scrutiny for pharmaceutical supplements is much lower in that the FDA doesn't highly regulate supplements. But when a pharmaceutical company, even if it originally comes from an herbal extract, decides to turn something into a pharmaceutical medication, they pay millions of dollars and spend many years to have it go through FDA to prove its essentially safety and efficacy. A lot of herbal supplements that are out there, there's no safety or efficacy data. I'll give you a good example of this. I was having like a kind of an online debate with Dr. Kyle Gillette about Phaedogia agrestis. And he was a big fan of using this for testosterone because Andrew Huberman went on Joe Rogan podcast talking about how this one guy tripled his testosterone, one guy. And I was like, okay, that's, first of all, it's terrible data, like an N of 1. But I was like, okay, Dr. Gillette, what are you seeing in terms of the clinical results with this? And he's like, well, some guys see a huge increase in testosterone, some guys see no increase. And I was like, well, so you're telling me that it's almost like playing Russian roulette. Sometimes people get zero benefit, sometimes people get a huge benefit, maybe too much of a benefit, and everything in between. And I was like, why is that? And he's like, well, there's no standardization of supplements. Some supplements may not even have the actual herb. It's literally a scam. It just says that the herb is there on the bottle, but it lacks the active ingredient. The second thing is, like, plants differ, right? You grow a plant in the summer versus the winter, and it may have different amounts of chemical saponins that is causing the LH boosting and testosterone boosting effect. So there's zero standardization. And I was like, well, that's kind of shitty medicine. Like, you have no idea whether it works, and you can't titrate it because you don't know if the batch that you got is actually effective or not. And then third, there's no testing for toxicity. We know that from the rat studies of Phaedogia agressus, there's actually suggestions that it may be toxic to the testicles. And I was like, there's no long-term safety data at all in terms of taking this random herb. We don't really understand it. It's not well characterized. Versus at least a pharmaceutical drug that's gotten FDA approved has gone through a lot of safety testing. And so when it passes that much, much higher bar of becoming a pharmaceutical drug, it becomes prescription only, and it only can be prescribed by a doctor. And then clomiphene falls into that category because it's essentially the child drug of a parent drug, clomiphene, which has been on the market since the 1970s, essentially. There's literally 50 plus years of clinical experience and safety data with clomiphene. Now, all pharmaceutical drugs have side effects, but at least we know the side effects. And that was the argument I was making to Dr. Gillette. He was like, well, SERMs have potential side effects. And I was like, yeah, they do. But we know them. We know how frequently they occur. We know the most common ones. It's like, better the devil that you know. That's my argument. It's like, okay, at least the consumers can look at it and be like, all right, these are the side effects. These are the rarity of it. I'm going to make an educated, informed choice about whether I'm going to take it or not. But at least I know what I'm getting into versus a random herbal supplement. You have no idea what you're getting into. Could be great, could be safe. It could literally be toxic to your balls. And are you going to take that risk? I would say that's a terrible idea. And I actually just think it's bad medicine, right? First rule of medicine, do no harm. So to me, it's crazy to want to offer an unknown herbal supplement that may or may not work, may or may not be toxic, versus at least a well-known doctor-prescribed pharmaceutical drug that has a well-characterized safety profile, and you can take that risk or not. So long story short, enclomiphene is doctor-prescribed only, and it's for a good reason, because it is a potent drug. Most, by the way, like I'm not saying all, but most over-the-counter supplements are relatively not potent. It's very hard to like overdo a lot of stuff unless you're obviously taking way more than what the supplement label says. They're not so strong. Now, there are some categories of drugs like NSAIDs, like the Tylenols and Advils, where clearly you can have liver toxicity if you take too much of it. But if you're talking about just kind of random vitamins and supplements, for the most part, there's obviously exceptions to that rule. It's hard to overdo it. But with pharmaceutical drugs, they are potent, and clomiphene is a very potent drug. And so it needs to be doctor supervised. So that's why we do blood testing to make sure that we're getting you to the appropriate levels. And it's not something that you want to do yourself, right? Even if it was available, you're not a doctor. You don't know the right dose. Our doctors have experience with thousands of patients. And so they know from not only their 10 years of medical training, but from their years of clinical experience, what the right amounts are, how to adjust it for you, what to look out for. And there's a reason they're doctors. So I think it's really important to be able to do that. Second part of your question is, if you have relatively normal testosterone levels, can you benefit from it? So first of all, it depends on what you consider normal. I think a lot of guys are misled because they only test their total testosterone levels. And we've talked about this in previous podcasts. Free testosterone is a much more clinically meaningful marker of testosterone because it correlates better with your actual symptoms and functioning. And a lot of guys actually have a deceptive level of testosterone. What I mean by that is you might have a testosterone level of 500, which looks average-ish but your SHBG may be very high. It may be 50 or maybe 70. And so you have sort of average total testosterone, but very low free testosterone. And the free testosterone is the unbound portion of the testosterone that's actually free to bind to the androgen receptors and have the anabolic androgenic action that helps you build muscles and all the other benefits of testosterone. And so what I would say to you is make sure that if you have done your testing, that if you have a total testosterone measurement and an SHBG measurement, that's sex hormone binding globulin, you can go online. There's a free testosterone calculator. You can calculate using the Vermillion equation what your free testosterone is. That's what we do in our program. We measure both of those markers. We assume a static albumin. So with those three numbers together, you can calculate your free testosterone, and you can figure out where you lie. If you go on our website, maximistribe.com, click on Learn, there's a Testosterone 101, and you can see what the range of testosterone looks like for both total and free. And for free testosterone, like a 50th percentile level would be like 134, I believe. The units are picograms per milliliter. And so you can kind of see where you lie in the spectrum of free testosterone. Like the first percentile would be 55, 99th percentile would be 266, and like I said, 50th percentile is about 134. So I find a lot of people, they think they have normal testosterone, their free testosterone's actually kind of weak. And so if that's the case, then our program can be very helpful in helping you go from, let's say, below average to above average. So that's first and foremost is, yes, it can often improve numbers, but make sure you know what your baseline is. Number two, even if let's say you are 50th percentile in terms of your free testosterone, the free testosterone, the 50th percentile at 134 is literally almost half of the 99th percentile at 266, meaning there's guys naturally that are walking around, now 1% of guys literally, who have twice the testosterone of the average guy. And these are the guys who become Olympic athletes, CEOs. They're just more masculine and have more anabolic androgenic activity. And quite frankly, it is a performance advantage, because why do you need to do steroids if you naturally have higher levels of testosterone? And that's why, quite frankly, not everyone is built equal. As they say, some guys are built different. And so that's a pretty wide spectrum, right? If there's guys walking around twice basically as high on testosterone naturally as other guys. And so, well, you can just accept your genetic fate, or you could be like, well, maybe I want to be better. And so you can optimize your levels and see if you do feel and function better. Because ultimately, in the end, and this is the last note I'll say on this, our advisors argue we treat symptoms, not numbers. So your testosterone level is useful so that we can calibrate and see if it's working, but ultimately how you feel and how you perform is really what matters. And so if you go from a 134 to, let's say, a 150, 175, maybe even 200, do you feel better? Do you have greater energy? Do you have greater motivation? Do you have greater drive? Do you have greater confidence? Do you have a greater ability to build muscle in response to the stimulus of working out at the gym? If all of those things are better, then yes, you benefit from higher levels of testosterone. And if you don't, then it's not right for you. Some guys feel fine on like an average level of testosterone because that's what they've gotten used to, or everything else is good in their life and they don't necessarily need it. But I think most guys, like I said, because they're either below their genetic potential, could probably benefit from optimizing their levels. So given our brand is around performance enhancement and optimization, I think most men, quite frankly, because they're lower than what they should be compared to their fathers and grandfathers, probably can benefit. The other thing I'll say about this too is when we do the medical history and symptom questionnaire, we look for whether there's clinically meaningful room for you to improve, right? If you fill out the questionnaire and you're like, my energy is 5 out of 5, motivation 5 out of 5, all my symptoms are great, I'm excellent, I feel wonderful, the doctor's not going to prescribe it to you, because where is the room for improvement if you're 5 out of 5 on every single measure? If that's the case, or even close to 5 out of 5 on every single measure, then there's no room for improvement, it's not going to benefit. But if you're like, my erections are a 3 out of 5, my work performance is a 3 out of 5, my athletic performance or sports performance is a 2 out of 5, then you have room for improvement. And that's where I think it's worth trying out and saying, okay, are these things improving? And more often than not, they do. I would say, for instance, in terms of sexual function, we know from the research literature, 75% of guys improve their sexual function on a SERM, the class of medications that we use. So basically, 3 out of 4 guys end up better, right, performing better sexually than not using the medication at all. And so, I think it's good indication that for most guys, it probably will help them if there's room for improvement.
We had another question via YouTube. I'm on the protocol at the 6.25 dose and wanted to ask if I could up my dose because certain days I feel a lack of energy or my energy dips around the afternoon and then I feel groggy or tired.
Yeah. So yes, it's a possibility. I would say talk about it with your physician, and they'll figure out if the medication dosage is right for you. Obviously, one of the benefits of our program is the ability to personalize the medication dosages. So if you're feeling you're not getting enough of an energy boost, I would say talk about it with your doctor, and they can potentially try it. You can always try the dose, like a higher dose, 12.5, see if it improves your energy, and if it doesn't, you can always go back down to the 6.25. So, but a couple questions that may help clarify. Number one, have you done your before and after tests on the 6.25, right? I'm curious what your testosterone started from and where it ended up at. And I think that can help give an indication of whether, you're getting enough benefit. And that would help better inform your physician about whether a higher dose would be helpful for you. So if you want to type that into the chat, if you know that, I can speculate a little bit on that. Not give medical advice, but I can kind of give you a high level general point of view. And then second, what's going on in terms of your sleep and your stress in particular? Sleep and stress, besides testosterone, are probably the 2 biggest drivers of your energy levels. And so it's quite normal actually to have a little bit of an energy dip in the afternoon. It's part of our circadian rhythm that basically about 7 hours after you wake up, you have a lull or a trough in your energy levels. And that's why a lot of cultures naturally have a siesta or nap time right around 2 or 3 o'clock, right? So it's not unusual to have a little bit of an energy dip, but is it the type where it's like, I can't stay asleep unless I go down some caffeine. I'm literally dozing off. My boss is catching me, drifting off and fluttering my eyes in a meeting and I'm getting in trouble for it. That's not good. That we want to address. If it's just like, I don't feel 100% at 2 o'clock versus 8 o'clock, that's natural, right? Our energy levels are not flat all throughout the day. There's a natural rhythm in that energy levels are typically highest in the late morning as we kind of peak, or and your cortisol is high in the morning, and then there's a dip in the early afternoon, and then it peaks again at like 6, 7, 8 o'clock, which is actually probably why it's the best time to strength train. Actually, is you get the highest strength and performance in sort of like mid to late evening time, right around dinner time or shortly after dinner time. So I think that's partly natural too. But if you're not sleeping enough, then you're clearly going to be definitely tired in the afternoon. It's not a bad idea to actually take a nap if that's the case, 20 to 45 minutes, or obviously fix your sleep at night so that you're getting 7 to 9 hours and you don't need a nap in the first place. That's going to be tremendously beneficial. Second thing is obviously if you have excessive chronic stress, not just acute stress. Everyone has little things that bother them, obviously, but it's prolonged everyday kind of stress, then that can definitely sap your energy as well. And so, I would say go on our Discord, which is at discord.maximustribe.com, get on the health coaching channel, and we can talk a little bit more about how to manage your stress levels so that it's not sapping your energy as much. So I think we have to look holistically at this, testosterone, sleep, and stress, and try to address those trifecta of factors to make sure that your energy levels are optimal. Because I don't think anyone alone is going to be like the magic pill for energy. You got to address all 3.
Another question via YouTube. Is DHT a trash hormone? And thank you for the videos. I appreciate the knowledge.
Absolutely not. DHT is a really important hormone. I don't know why it's a trash hormone. DHT is literally derived from your testosterone. They're both actually androgenic hormones. DHT being more androgenic, meaning that it's responsible for more of the effects of virilization, literally the things that like make you a man, beard growth, body hair growth, deep voice, are all affected by DHT. It's also, our clinical advisors describe it as the virility hormone. It's responsible for your drive, aggression, libido. And so, if you actually eliminate it through the use of prescription 5 alpha reductase inhibitors, so these are drugs that block the conversion from testosterone to DHT, the most common example being finasteride, the hair loss medication. It'll sap your DHT and it'll actually make it below normal. And for a lot of people, it does eliminate their motivation, drive, and libido. In some instances, actually really hurting sexual function quite a bit. So no, I don't think it's a trash hormone. I think it's actually a very important hormone, and it needs to be, good as well. The benefit of the Maximus King Protocol is, testosterone and DHT move together, right? Because one's derived from the other. But it maintains the ratio. So even if testosterone is going up, DHT is going up with it. In fact, I looked at one of the original enclomiphene papers, in which I believe, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly, testosterone went up something around 58%, DHT went up something around 28%. So it's not going up as much as the testosterone. And a very common question that we get asked is, well, aren't you concerned about the DHT increase on it? And I was like, first of all, no, it's not a huge increase. In fact, on a relative basis in the paper, it went up like 10 nanograms per deciliter, which is not a lot. Now, those guys were low to begin with, but a little bit of a DHT increase is not going to magically make your hair fall out. And second of all, it's going up with the testosterone. So it's the balance, the ratio of these hormones that I think is much more important for things like hair loss, where if DHT was the evil hormone that magically caused all hair loss, then taking a DHT blocker would eliminate baldness. And quite frankly, it hasn't happened. It's mildly effective in some patients, but it's not a cure-all. It doesn't really reverse balding. It doesn't work as well, quite frankly, as it should, because it can definitely block all of your DHT and your hair can still fall out. And there's guys who have high DHT, super, virile dudes, and they still have all their head of hair. That's why I think hair loss is much more complicated. It's probably a combination of genetics, mostly inflammation, the ratio and balance of these hormones. And so it's not just I think people really wish there was one singular factor like DHT and we could address it like that and it would fix everything. But the reality is our bodies are much more complicated than that. So no, I wish it's not that simple, and it's really important, and I do think it's important to maintain it. That's why I'm not a fan of finasteride. I think it's important to have normal levels of DHT. It does a lot for your mind and your body, and you want to maintain good levels of DHT. All right. I think there was someone who wanted to actually join us on Instagram as well. So if that person wants to raise, I think I lost you there. Someone asked, what do you think of nootropics? I think most nootropics are overrated. First of all, most nootropics aren't regulated. It's a lot of, like I said, over-the-counter supplements, which for the most part I'm not a fan of. Second, there's a whole gray market of nootropics, which are things that really even shouldn't be sold. They're often like Russian research chemicals that you can buy on the gray market through these nootropic or smart drug vendors. Who knows what the hell you're getting there? And I just think, like, literally you're playing guinea pig with yourself with experimental drugs that are coming from God knows where. And so why do that with yourself? You know what I mean? If you really have an attentional problem, go talk to a neuropsychologist to get a proper ADHD and LD, learning disability evaluation, to see if you legitimately have ADHD. Not just an online pill mill that'll write you an Adderall script. That's drug-seeking behavior. It's if you genuinely want to know if you have a problem, you should go sit down, do the proper testing for it, and see if you actually have an attentional problem and you really need medication or not, or at least could benefit from it. And then get proper prescribed medications, I would say. Why take a random experimental Russian drug that we don't know very much about versus there are tried and true, stimulant medications that can be helpful. Caffeine is obviously an over-the-counter stimulant medication. It's well characterized. It is a smart drug, I would argue. It does seem to enhance cognitive functioning. Now, unfortunately, it has some side effects too. It's probably the number one cause of insomnia as well. People overdo it. I was actually literally having a conversation with one of our members the other day who was reliant on melatonin, and he's like, I need it to fall asleep. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, I really like caffeine and I just pound caffeine throughout the day to work, but it takes me 30 to 60 minutes to fall asleep at night. And when I take melatonin, it helps it go better. And I was like, and so he's like, what else can I take if melatonin is not a great idea to take every night? And I'm not a fan of daily melatonin use unless you absolutely need it. And I was like, well, you're looking for a pharmacological solution to a pharmacological problem. If the reason you can't sleep is because you're downing caffeine, obviously cut down on your caffeine intake or take it earlier in the day. But taking another drug to solve the problem that's caused by the first drug, usually, unless you really need that first drug, is not the smartest approach, or that's at least the wisest approach, I would say. So caffeine, while being a smart drug, does have its downsides. And in fact, there was a recent paper that just came out as an analysis of the NHANES data that showed the negative correlation between caffeine use and testosterone. Now, we don't know, like I said, it's correlational, it's associational data that consuming caffeine lowers testosterone, but I do think it's an interesting finding. And it basically means, well, I don't know, there's some interesting, plausible mechanism. And there is a mechanistic explanation for it as well. So it's not totally just a correlation. We know in animal studies that there is a pathway that explains why caffeine can inhibit testosterone production. So I would say, I'm not saying it's don't consume caffeine. It's probably the most consumed drug in the world. I would say reasonable, moderate dosages of it are probably totally fine, but don't overdo it, obviously, for numerous reasons. But I think better to, TLDR, better to stick with tried and true over-the-counter and prescription cognitive enhancing medications and supplements rather than play around with nootropics. Now, the last thing I'll say, we did just launch the Lover Protocol. Most people take the Lover Protocol for two reasons. One, obviously to enhance their sexual performance and libido, because it does use, obviously, an ED drug. But the other part of it that's really interesting is it does enhance cerebral blood flow, meaning it enhances blood flow to your brain. And there's a specific paper that looked at all the cognitive measures that get influenced when you take tadalafil, which is one half of the combination of drugs that we use in the Lover Protocol. And it found across the board enhancements in memory, attention, processing speed, and at least a half a dozen other cognitive variables and outcomes. So I would argue if you're really interested in a nootropic or smart drug, try the Lover Protocol. And even though it's sort of like the maybe not the most common usage for it, but it kind of makes intrinsic sense that unlike caffeine, which is a vasoconstrictor, reduces blood flow to your brain, increasing blood flow to the brain enhances cognitive function. That mechanism is obviously logical. So I would encourage you to try that out in terms of the Lover Protocol. And it's a low, safe dose that you can take every day indefinitely. 5 milligrams is very safe. A lot of people take it for lowering blood pressure, which is not the reason that we use it, but I'm saying that it's well characterized, it's been well studied. And so, yeah, I would argue if you want to try a nootropic or a smart drug, take the Lover Protocol because there is some good evidence behind it. This person said, I tried Qualia. It's pretty bad for me anyway, but everyone's trying to become limitless. Yeah, it's a great movie, the Bradley Cooper Limitless movie. I don't think there is quite a limitless drug. I guess enhancing your testosterone would be the closest thing to it. But yeah, we're doing our best. Do you have a number on your IG? I don't know what you're referring to in terms of if you're referring to a telephone number, but you can raise your hand and or try to join the live, and I'm happy to do that. Namus Gage, can you answer some questions for me? Well, we got 5 minutes left in the live stream, so if you type them in, yes, I can answer them.
What is your thoughts on turkesterone?
Yeah, turkesterone is heavily promoted by Derek at More Place, More Dates, and even though I'm a fan of Derek, shout out to Derek, I don't think the evidence is very good on that one. And I think he actually, quite frankly, fairly gets a lot of shit for turkesterone because it's a disappointing supplement. There's some money to be made. He has obviously a financial incentive to promote it, just as I have a financial incentive, obviously, to promote, our protocols. But I think the difference is, like, if you generally look around, most people and the research evidence are pretty pro enclomiphene, tadalafil, bremelanotide, the compounds that we use. There's not good research evidence on turkesterone. The bioavailability is really poor. That's why he has to complex it with something called HPBCD in order to make it more bioavailable. But if you even just read the anecdotal reviews of people who are using it, they have to take massive amounts of it. Doesn't seem to make much of a difference in terms of increasing testosterone. I've seen very little blood work that shows that it significantly increases testosterone or provides strength gains or any of that stuff. Honestly, the real reason that people take turkesterone is because there's no good over-the-counter supplements besides creatine, essentially, for enhancing, strength and muscle gains. I think that's the only one that has really like good, solid research evidence, aside from whey protein. But even whey protein, you don't need if you consume enough protein from food. And there's just nothing good that works. And so the real solution is not to take turkesterone, it's to take something prescription that actually works, right? I would say the King Protocol, and there's data to back up this claim, increases testosterone 1.5 to about 2.5x in the research studies, which is way better than what you can do with turkesterone. And turkesterone is expensive anyway. The dosage that I've seen people have to take, it's going to end up costing you $100 to $200 a month anyway. So you might as well just get on a legitimate, medication-based protocol. So yeah, very overrated, very underwhelming, not a lot of good data behind it. Honestly, it's quite wasteful. Someone asked, how long does a Lever protocol take to work? That one's actually immediate, right? So the tadalafil portion of it, within 30 to 60 minutes, you'll get the blood flow enhancing effects, right? So if you're taking it right before sex, for instance, or taking it right before going to the gym, if you take it 30 to 60 minutes before, you'll notice a difference in terms of the blood flow. Now, if you take it on a daily basis, you don't need to time it. You're like, when am I having sex? When am I going to the gym? Forget about that. Just take it on a daily basis. It'll build up in your system because the half-life's usually 24 to 36 hours, and you're ready anytime. And that's a huge benefit, I think, of that daily dosing is you don't have to worry about it. You can be spontaneous, you can be romantic, or, if you're going to the gym, you can just go to the gym whenever you want, and it's floating around your system, and it'll provide the benefits whenever you want. The second half of the Lever protocol, the bremelanotide, that can take a little bit longer in terms of the libido enhancing effects. So I think it generally takes a little bit of time to kind of build up in your system, and that benefits from that daily chronic use. So the blood flow effects you'll feel immediately. The libido enhancing effects take a little bit more time. So that's the TLDR of that. I appreciate the request to be in the live, but we actually have to wrap up today. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us today on our Instagram Live. Sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but feel free to join us next week. We have this show every Thursday at 6 o'clock Pacific time. And you can also join our Discord. So join our Discord at discord.maximustribe.com. There's a health coaching channel if you're interested in health coaching. If you have questions about the King or Lever protocol, there's separate channels for that too. Happy to answer any questions there. Otherwise, have a very healthy, happy Thursday, and I will catch you all next week.